Hi, here we are, back. Do you miss us?
Hello, how are you?
Welcome, everyone, and this is the Underbelly.
The Underbelly. We read things so that you don't have to.
Looking at the odd side of popular culture, I guess. I'm Rainey.
I'm Rita.
And today is our not requested, not demanded, but it's totally coming, part 2 of V.C. Andrews' Flowers in the Attic, all the other stuff.
Yes. So we really thought it would be interesting to go into V.C. Andrews or Victoria Andrews, or, which her original name was, Cleo Virginia Andrews.
No! Oh my gosh, I'm learning so much.
She was Cleo Victoria Andrews, and when she put in her manuscript for Flowers in the Attic, which was her first hit, they sent her back the manuscript, and they had changed it to V.C. Andrews. And she called them up, and she was like, I don't understand this, that's not my name. And they said, oh, it was a mistake, but then later on they decided, or they let her know that it actually was because they thought it would sell more copies if the gender of the author was ambiguous, which is fits in with that whole, like, gothic literature back in the day, all of those authors, those female authors writing books and having to change their names to sort of ambiguous, gender names.
No.
Yeah, but
but I was thinking...
We wanted to talk about... Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's like, it kind of makes sense in a way, I think, and I know we're kind of skipping ahead, but like how a lot of V.C. Andrews' characters feel like, you know, I have to tap into my more masculine side to be heard, you know, especially Kathy, if this is how her foray into publishing is, you know, like to make my voice heard, I have to harness that masculine side of me. Yeah.
And I just, like, I always thought it was interesting. I remember when I got a little bit older and I was a little bit more curious about who V.C. Andrews was, that I started, you know, researching her and learning about her past, and we'll go into it in a little bit more detail, but really finding out how much of herself she put into those books. So that's why it's really strange when you compare what her life was like to, for Kathy, for example, how they're much more alike than one would imagine upon the first reading. So we want to talk about V.C. Andrews, and then we want to talk about the rest of the series, only because I think it's just like, it's really fascinating, isn't it, Rainey? And just really...
Her life and the recurring themes in her books. I mean, I know not every single author puts their life story in their writing, you know, like Mark Twain freed exactly 0 slaves, but he wrote Huckleberry Finn. F. Scott Fitzgerald was not a bootlegger, but he talked about that in his writings. But V.C. Andrews, man, she put a lot of herself in there, and I'm not just talking about her I slept with my uncle during my wedding night article. Yeah, you know what? Let me run down a little bit of facts that we've accrued about V.C. Andrews that were particularly interesting. So she was born in 1923. She died in 1986 at the age of 63 in Virginia, which is actually the state where most of the story takes place in Flowers in the Attic. Again, she puts herself in her stories. She used crutches and a wheelchair for most of her life due to arthritis. There's a little bit of ambiguity about what exactly happened that resulted in her paralysis. Some say she fell and that triggered rheumatoid arthritis. It's a little bit mysterious, and I think she kept it that way on purpose. But that also goes with the mysterious illnesses that we see in a lot of her stories, not just in Flowers in the Attic, with Kathy having poor health, or, Corinne being sick, or even My Sweet Audrina with some of those horrific illnesses. But also in all of her other stories, like her De Beers story, her Angel story, there's always something with an illness in the body showing an illness in the mind. Yeah. And what's interesting, and maybe it's
it's too early to make this jump, but I had read something where she was talking about, how Kathy was a prisoner in her house in Flowers in the Attic, and that V.C. Andrews later on in her life, when she would read the book over, she would cry because she realized that she had used that situation to describe what Kathy was going through, to describe her own frustrations of feeling like she was trapped and paralyzed in her situation. So she also wrote a whole bunch of short stories. I found that she supposedly self-published a few novels before Flowers in the Attic, which I said was her first critical hit. And nobody knows what they are. She wouldn't tell anybody out of respect for her family. She didn't want them reading it, so God knows what they were about. But
hey,
she also
they can't be as bad. They can't be as bad as some of those Harry Potter / fan fiction. Nothing like Draco and Harry, or Hermione and Ginny.
God knows what I would have loved. I mean, I really wish that she had written like the titles and put them in a lockbox somewhere. But I mean, I guess we'll never know. But I would have loved to have known. But then she wrote a whole series of confession stories, and I find this absolutely fascinating. One of her confession stories, which was her first success, and was published in a pulp magazine, was entitled "I Slept with My Uncle on My Wedding Night." That sounds so much like one of those erotica tales, those short stories that people can whip up online. I think it's so interesting that she wrote something like this, and that there was that whole niche way back. Like, we kind of think about this happening now on computers, and people sitting behind computer screens and writing about these torrid and forbidden romances. But V.C. Andrews was on her game a long time ago. I slept with my uncle on my wedding night. And FYI, that was not autobiographical because V.C. Andrews was not married, never married. And then this is also an interesting thing to note. All of her series often contained consensual incest and rags to riches tales. So if you read, based on our recommendation, the Flowers in the Attic series, or if you're curious about her other series, you will see those themes come up. And then when she died in 1986, the books were so successful, and so many of them she had begun or she had summaries for. The family wanted to obviously capitalize on that, and so they hired ghostwriter Andrew Niederman.
And when we say that V.C. Andrews is prolific, we are not exaggerating. We are actually, in fact, underselling, because this woman, if you've ever gone to a brick and mortar store, like to your Barnes and Nobles, used bookstore, she will have not just her own shelf, but shelves as in plural.
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
She's up there with James Patterson, probably, is pretty prolific.
Mm-hmm. I'm embarrassed to tell you how many times I've gone to Barnes & Noble and have repurchased Flowers in the Attic because I lost it, or I don't know, I'm embarrassed to say probably how many copies I bought, but when you go there, it's overwhelming because she has these series. So I don't know the exact number of series that she has, but in each series, it's typically 5 novels.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine and it has to be over 30 seasons. And I'm probably, again, underestimating that because...
Well, I only think that My Sweet Audrina is the only standalone novel.
Right. It's a standalone, right.
Mm-hmm.
And to talk about how prolific she is, she's also been translated, her books have been translated into at least 19 languages. So with all of these facts that we have, all these pieces of trivia that we have about who V.C. Andrews was as a person, it doesn't give us a whole lot. And she was known for being so incredibly mysterious. So I was telling Rainey that I'm such a loser.
No, you're not. You're just an amazing academic.
But I can't help but be fascinated by this. And whether you love her or hate her, whether you read Flowers in the Attic and you thought it was disgusting, anything on that spectrum, it's interesting to me that this woman who lived with her mother, who was a recluse, even though she didn't like that term.
That's our word. No, I'm kidding. I'm being an asshole.
Well, but she's very interesting to me. So I found myself looking up a few of her articles. And Rainey, if I have a second, I just want to read a couple of things that her quotes.
Okay.
Things that she said directly in her interview. So there was this one interview. By the way, if you Google V.C. Andrews, if you look at any of her groups on Facebook, if you look at her official page, it is astonishing to me the cult following she still has. I mean, people listening probably think that I'm a cult fanatic. I'm not. I'm just somebody who's nostalgic for me. But there are people who are obsessed with her. So she, way back when in the 80s, had an interview with People.
Mm-hmm.
And all of her followers refer to this as the infamous People article because she was very, very unhappy with it at the end. She thought that they took terrible photographs of her. They referred to her as a recluse, which I said before, triggered her because she was like, I am not a recluse. In the article, they refer to her as 56. She writes to one of her fans that she was very upset about the article because they said she was 56 when she's really 20 years younger. But dates show she would have been 57 at the time, which is also really interesting because we make that connection with how Corinne and Kathy's obsession with ages.
Even the grandmother's obsession with age. And it's not just in Flowers in the Attic. My Sweet Audrina, there's a whole bunch with age playing an incredible factor. In the Cutler series, you have this competition of women and age is brought up, when one woman says to another, and it's supposed to be like the most insulting thing. You're jealous because you're old and I'm young.
Yeah. There was a big fascination with that. There was, there's that scene we've referenced before where Kathy is kind of on her last stages in the book to finally put her mother in her place and kind of begin or finish her revenge by getting together with Corinne's husband. And so she shows up at this ball and she deliberately styles her hair the way that her mother had styled her hair and wears a dress she remembers her mother wearing and shows up and she's literally the mirror image of her, except the younger version of it. And Andrews makes that quite clear. So a couple of really interesting things that I thought V.C. Andrews said in this magazine, which she loathed, this magazine article. Mm-hmm. She said, my tales are not bizarre. Reality is.
Mm-hmm.
And then she says, I really feel sorry for my characters because I put them through hell. I don't like happy endings.
Oh my God.
So interesting. Because it's true. Sorry, spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't read the entire series, the Flowers in the Attic series. But, Kathy and Chris die. Chris dies in a similar way that their father died. Actually, the exact same way. He dies in a car accident. Kathy, overwhelmed with grief, goes up to the attic of their home and dies in the attic of a broken heart. I mean, no kidding that she doesn't like happy endings. Nothing ever good happens with the original characters that you were introduced to. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah,
I often wonder because she feels like she's not having a happy ending, right? Nothing's going. And then later on, she finally came back and interviewed with somebody. She was a little wary, but she interviewed with him and she said this, and I thought this was also actually fascinating. She said, I loved the fairy tales, but there is an element of horror in fairy tales, so that when I would go through the woods, I was always looking for something, a witch, an ogre, something scary, and it was never there, and that was a little bit disappointing. I didn't want a real horror like a rapist or a murderer, but I wanted fairy tale horror.
Well, in a way that makes sense. I found this BuzzFeed interview, and I'll be sure to put the link in our video here by BuzzFeed, and it was published in 2014, so around the time when the Lifetime movies made on her books came out. Mm-hmm. But the Simon & Schuster editor who bought Flowers in the Attic, mentioned how when she met V.C. Andrews told her how, since she was paralyzed or was wheelchair bound when she was around 14 and 15, V.C. Andrews kind of expressed that her life more or less stopped when she was 14 or 15, and she lived in her mind. And what I find really interesting isn't that around the age when Kathy was stuck in the attic?
Yep.
And V.C. Andrews' mother became her caretaker.
Right. Right. And she also actually, I'll send you also so we can put this link up because these interviews are really, really interesting. But she says at one point, I guess the person had asked her, does your personal life affect your writing? And she says, so it does affect you, and that's why I write. When I wrote Flowers in the Attic, all of Kathy's feelings about being in prison were my feelings, so that when I read them now, I cry.
Definitely.
That made me really sad. I mean, she had a very sad life. I mean, to the point where she's a 57-year-old woman.
Mm-hmm.
She's madly referred to her as 56. And she's claiming that she's 20 years younger to a fan. And it's that sort of like Miss Havisham. I always bring her up when I think of like these older, frantic, female people stuck in the past. But that's kind of how I view it, Mm-hmm. But something else that I thought was interesting, and this is my last piece from these articles, I could go on and on about them, but something else that I think is interesting about the motivation behind her writing these series, and maybe her style that some people don't get or like, is the fact that she says that she's not interested very much in like what's actually happening in the moment. She said that she had begun to study psychology, so she said the crime wasn't nearly as fascinating as the motivation. Why was the question foremost on my mind, and that's what I write about. The whys, the wherefores, and the results.
Well, I don't know how to tell her, but she kind of really likes the crime.
I mean,
far be it for me to tell an author what she's actually writing, but
I would argue, how about this? I would argue that everything that happens in the attic and that incest that occurs, all that stuff, that is all the why that drives Kathy as a character and drives the revenge and the actions that happen to her family after that book.
Fair enough.
That would be my argument because, all that time and all those things happen minus the incest, it would still be terrible. And that gives you the why as well. But adding in all of that, it makes it even more egregious and you understand even more so. And then Corey dying and Carrie eventually dying in the second book, putting in all of that.
It's
reasoning, I feel like.
It's pretty damn bleak, is what I can tell you.
She loves it. She loves and then she also said, this is her last thing that I had saved. She said, I have to admit I resent that sometimes as an author I am lumped into the horror genre. But there is an element of fear that I deliberately maintain throughout my books. They tell me I am very good at that, keeping you on edge, because I like to be kept on edge.
Well, this is also the thing I find really interesting about V.C. Andrews is that she did not like being told what category she was put in or anything that she saw as a label as someone put on her,
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. Like Recluse, she was so furious about that and, absolutely. That she didn't like being labeled in a way that, especially if she disagreed with it. And this was interesting to me too. Like you would envision this person who's been, paralyzed or almost paralyzed, sickly for a long period of time. Now she's in her 50s. Not have as strong of a will,
mm-hmm.
or an imaginative will, but she had it.
Well, also, how we mentioned that some of her characters really seem to be a little not aware, like lacking self-awareness.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, she seemed almost offended that people would label her as horror, and, you know, her reaction is, well, how could anyone think I was writing horror? What's wrong with them? And really? You don't see it? You don't see it, lady?
She just, and I have another question.
Okay.
I'm curious about. So, when I was reading all of her stats, right, and we talk about how she made, you know, she had semi-success with her confession story, you know, about the uncle. I slept with my uncle on my wedding night or whatever. So we see that she already had a preoccupation with incest.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right? I mean, when I always thought Flowers in the Attic, like it was just something that, you know, was generated maybe when she was writing about these, like, you know, these kids going through puberty in the attic and what might actually happen as a result of it.
Oh, no, it would make sense. Like in the 70s, you know, the obsession with psychology. I think this is during a lot of times where people talk about, like, family abuse.
So why do you think that she did it, though? Do you think that she did it for shock value, or do you think that it was a fetish of hers? Because keep in mind, she wrote that short story for, like, this Pulp Fiction magazine.
Well, okay.
You know, where limited amount of reading.
No, you need to correct me because I am the history major and you're the lit major over here. But isn't incest something that comes up in Southern Gothic literature? I'm thinking about the book like The Beguiled, where the main female character, Miss Martha, had a consensual, incestuous relationship with her brother, and even a little bit like Margaret Mitchell, where Ashley and Melanie were cousins.
It's hard for me because of the way she uses it. So, if it were there in passing, like, if we found out that, if Kathy and Chris found out their parents were married and they were related, but they never engaged in incest.
Mm-hmm.
Or in her other series, if it was her, and this is also the thing, Flowers in the Attic is her really only series in my mind that alludes to the Southern Gothic genre.
Mm-hmm.
Her other series do not. Her other series happen in different places of the United States. They don't have that spooky mansion feeling. They just don't.
Mm-hmm.
So in my mind, if that's something that she has in freaking every book series that she does, if this is something that she was writing about for a magazine, you know, maybe a full decade before Flowers in the Attic, maybe 2 decades before Flowers in the Attic, I find that really interesting.
That is true.
You know what I mean? Like, I feel like I feel like it served as a trope anymore.
It is true.
It's something taken and she's gone way overboard with it. You know what I mean? Like, there's other series, like, I remember I can't think of the name of the series at the top of my head, but there's one that takes place in Boston.
Uh-huh.
And
I want to say Star series, but I'm probably wrong.
No, I think it might be. And they're not in any mansion. They're not in the South. Mm-hmm. There's not, you know, there's secrets. Oh, there's secrets in every one of her series. But Flowers in the Attic, to me, was the only one that really had that Southern Gothic. There's one that happens, there's another book series, Heaven, that happens, I believe, in, like, West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, the only one that really, really, really has a lot of allusions to Gothic literature is Flowers in the Attic. So, to me, it seems pathological that she has it in every series. And then also when you look back and you realize one of these confession stories that she had incest in it. I mean, I would just like to know, I just find that bizarre, don't you?
It's kind of weird that one of your signature writing moves is incest.
And consensual incest.
And these people are really, really in love. Like, they're in love. They are desired by so many other people. But
there's a scene at the end of, there's a scene at the end of, the second book, After Flowers in the Attic, where, you know, Kathy tries her hardest to run away from Chris, and she has all these different lovers and husbands, and all of this, you know, drama happens, and, you know, tragedy. And at the end of the novel, she sort of faces the music and ends up with Chris. And there's this part where she's watching him shave and whistle to himself and hum to himself as he's shaving at the end. And she wonders to herself, did he know that this was how it was always going to end all along?
Well, okay, I have to point out in Petals in the Wind, the second book in the series, which is a book that I really like. I think it's a strong sequel to Flowers in the Attic. I will let my feelings in all the other novels come out. I find it very strange that Kathy, who has always wanted to be the most important person in Christopher's life, is the one trying to have a normal life. You know, she's like, by God, we are going to be normal. We're not going to talk about our time in the attic. That's what happened. We can't undo it, but I'm going to try to be normal.
Yeah.
And,
well, I have a theory.
Okay.
My theory is that Chris always needed Corinne, their mother, more. Right? Like more than Kathy needed her. Mm-hmm. Like, Chris always needed his mother. He always believed in her. He was always confident in her, even when things were going to shit. He was like, you know, he was dependent on her. And then we realize eventually, right, he transfers those emotions and those feelings to Kathy, albeit stronger. And he really, really needs her. He tells her in Flowers in the Attic that, you know, listen, there's never going to be anyone else for me. You're the only one who's going to understand what we went through. You're the only one I'm ever going to love. Kathy loves Chris. He loves him. But she holds him up to a pedestal. Remember, she refers to him frequently as her eternal optimist. He's so, he's what he really got her through everything. And so she holds him up to a pedestal. That's one thing. And the other thing to me also is that Kathy, unlike Chris, was never really that dependent on Corinne. She gave up on Corinne very early. Mm-hmm. Rightfully so, because perhaps she saw herself in Corinne. That was something that we brought up last time. But she was so filled with rage after that, to me, that's kind of all she saw for a long time. That rage and that revenge. And I think that she really just wanted to be normal, and she wanted to pretend like that didn't happen, and she wanted them to go back to normal. And I think that Chris needed her more. Like, I think that Chris didn't have other things to distract him. Like, he wanted to be a doctor and everything. That was his big drive. And Kathy's big drive is being a dancer, but Kathy was able to, I think, compartmentalize things a lot better than he was.
Now, we're jumping a little ahead. I think we're just going to talk about the rest of the series now. But one thing that I found really fascinating in Petals on the Wind, and I didn't really find it in all the other sequels, was there is a major consequence to what Kathy and Chris did in the attic, where after they're found by this doctor, Paul Sheffield, right? They moved to South Carolina, which, by the way, if you're trying to run away from your crazy families who locked you in the attic, I just have to point this out, and maybe I'm the asshole. I will own it. I will wear that badge proudly, I guess. I don't know, Rita, but do not just run from Virginia to South Carolina. It is not that far away.
Oh my God.
And this is where we have to do our basic declaration here that I might be a little too fascinated with the details. God forgive me. I will point out geography and how your plans are not good if and fixate on that.
They were headed to Florida, right?
Yes, also, Christopher, you want to become a doctor, but you don't know the difference between up, down, left, and right?
And didn't they want to be like trapeze dancers or something like that? Not dancers, trapeze artists. Something like that.
I know Chris still really wanted to be a doctor, but
yeah, but like that was like the way that they were going to make money or something like that. You know, I mean, I had somebody email me and they were like, I still don't understand why they didn't go to the police about what happened with Corinne.
Well, they get picked up by Paul Sheffield, who is a doctor. So, you know, Chris is really happy and he believes them, right? Can I please mention that, Paul Sheffield actually has a housekeeper who is a mute woman named Henny. A mute African American woman. Oh yes, thank you for that one. But like a mute helper who, and both Paul and Henny believe their story and has like
right away.
Yeah.
Right away, they're like, oh, okay.
And but Paul is please help me describe Paul, because all I can think of is creeper, and I know I'm being unfair.
That's funny. When I read it, I actually thought that he was a decent man, but I should say, and anybody who has read it or read Flowers in the Attic, you won't be surprised by this. We always talk about doubles, right, and history repeating itself, and Kathy is very quickly becoming a seductress, right? She's described as very beautiful. I think she's taking a few, cues from her mother. So Paul takes them in. He believes them. He believes their story. He takes them in. He's going to help them. Mm-hmm. And she feels, this poor girl, that she owes him somehow. And in her mind, the only way that she can pay him is through her body. So this girl propositions him, I don't know how many times. And you get from the story, that he's attracted to her and that he's fighting the urge. But he fights that urge multiple times. So to me, I always thought he was a pretty decent guy. Eventually, he succumbs and he has a relationship with her.
Well, because all men do.
What?
All men do.
All men do, exactly. But, think about it though. Like, he's this guy, he's well off, he's described as very good looking, he seems like a very decent person. He sends Chris to school, he sends Carrie to school, he sends Kathy to school and ballet school, the best school he can, and she literally tries to pay him back with bodily favors multiple times, and he always turns her away.
Oh no, but V.C. Andrews can't help but put in that he looks at her budding breasts, and that just, I'm sorry, budding breasts, flowers in the attic, petals in the wind. I felt like I was getting whacked over the head with the flower metaphors there, but again, as I point out, I am the asshole over here.
No, you're not. Stop. Oh, please.
But.
Oh, I'm the bitch.
But after, as I mentioned,
that's our things, hey, this, instead of just saying Rainey and Rita, it's hey, it's the bitch in the apple.
We can go fight crime. Anyway, as I mentioned, the only consequence from what Kathy and Christopher do is that, Kathy suffers a miscarriage.
That's so interesting you say that, because I always believed that Paul's story, that she had been so malnourished and behind with her periods that it was actually a blockage in her uterus. They performed a D&C, but you don't have to D&Cs are not just for miscarriages.
Okay, so this is where Rita and I diverge, and it is something that is talked about in V.C. Andrew forums. Who do we believe? Yes. Paul, who says that it's a blockage because they were malnourished in the attic, as Rita points out. Or do we believe, right, do we believe what Kathy suspects, that she miscarried because of what happened with her and Christopher in the attic, and also what Amanda, Paul's sister, tells her, that she did know about what Kathy and Christopher did, and yes, it was an abomination.
Right. So we should back up and say that even though Paul was as noble as he could be for a while, he eventually embraces Kathy and they have a relationship. They're engaged. They're so happy. Things seem great. The D&C thing had happened a while before that.
Mm-hmm.
Amanda.
It's while Paul is nursing Kathy that they, give in to their feelings for each other.
Right. Right. So Amanda, Paul's mean-spirited sister, meets with Kathy and tells her about Paul's past, which I'm not even sure if we really need to get into, but there's a whole misunderstanding.
Paul is an older man with his own troubles that makes him very sympathetic to what Kathy, Christopher, and Carrie went through.
But Amanda spins it in such a way that Kathy takes it poorly. And also she says, and didn't you realize that you had a malformed child? And then the reason why I really believe that it's a lie is she gestures to a jar. That's it.
That abomination that you have.
I don't think that Paul would have kept that around.
No, Paul was not cruel.
Right. So once that happens, so then eventually Kathy decides, F this, I need to run away. So she runs away. She marries one of, a kind of a cruel ballet dancer that's been after her for a while. And she comes back, Julian, right? And she comes back to see Paul and she tells Paul what happened. She says, look, I understand this happened, whatever. And he's like, Kathy, you should have talked to me first. And he was like, you were bleeding profusely because your periods were all messed up. You didn't have, I promise you didn't have, a miscarriage. And the thing that Amanda told you about my past is not true. Did she tell you about this too? No, she didn't. So to me, I always believed that. I've always believed Paul because I do believe above all that he loved her.
Well, see, that's my thing, that I believe that Paul loved Kathy so much that this would be something he would hide from her, knowing her guilt, her trauma, how she was still harboring all of this hatred towards her grandmother and her mother, the guilt she felt over Corey's death, over Carrie being unable to cope with life, and still feeling this attraction to Christopher, that Paul would say something like that to spare her, because if nothing else, Paul will do anything he can to spare Kathy more pain.
I am so shocked that you think this, that we are like on the opposite side here.
Is this even more shocking than me not liking Kathy?
Yeah, I can't believe you don't like Kathy. I mean,
but we do agree, right? That like Carrie following her mother around, no matter how much Corinne rejects her, like a baby duck imprinting on a tennis ball, was, I didn't know how to feel about that.
I just, like, you don't understand. I'm, like, currently Googling how many people share your opinion. I mean, to me, it was always like, and I had a conversation with my sister, because I've told you that my sister loves this series, too. Or, I don't, she probably kicked me in the ass if she heard me say she loves the series. I doubt she loves it, but it's, like, how I feel. It's nostalgia. But to me, it was always like, yeah, like, that was her greatest fear. And I also feel like V.C. Andrews was such a sadist. I feel like she would have, if she wanted it to be that it was for sure a miscarriage of a malformed, child, that she would have made it really clear. But I don't know. I mean, look, there's an argument for both. I'd like to know what people think. If anybody has read it or
yes,
reading
it. Please, people. This is something that is endangering mine and Rita's relationship. No, actually, it's not. But it's something.
That actually is, because I feel like not talking to you anymore about this. First you attack Kathy. So, something else I kind of want to bring up about Paul, and then, we'll go on to sort of general progression of characters that we know through the series and how they change or how they stay the same.
Okay.
But something else that I think is really interesting about Paul, and it's funny that you say that you think he's a creeper, and I actually want you to talk a little bit more about that. But before you do, I just want to say something really interesting. So, Kathy in Petals on the Wind ends up marrying Paul.
Yes.
At this point, Paul has suffered a heart attack.
Uh-huh.
He's very sick.
Yes.
Kathy has, I believe, 2 children from her previous relationships now, because, it's Kathy. And, he's dying. And he says to her that he wants her to be with Christopher, that Christopher has waited long enough and he's gone through long enough, and he tells her that, they can pull it off and they'll figure out a way, and that's what he wants for her. And that's when, at the end, when Paul dies, like everybody else in this freaking book, and he finally comes together with Chris, and then it's the scene that I described before where she's watching him, shave and be so happy with himself, Chris. And so I just think that was also interesting about Paul. Like, Paul was their savior. He was really the only person in the world that knew everything about them.
And didn't judge them.
And C. Andrews has him give them that blessing in the end, which I think, and he was so, by the way, he finds out about their love very early on in the book, what happened between them, and he's not judgmental at all. He doesn't throw them out. He doesn't drag them in front of the police. He's always very, very accepting, to the point where you almost wonder, is this even believable? But why, Rainey, why else do you think that he's a bit of a creep?
Okay. Maybe creeper is a bit strong. I mean, I do have issues with a 40-year-old man who succumbs, quote, unquote, succumbs to the wiles of a teenager who has been traumatized, right? So I kind of feel like, really, dude, really? But compared to Kathy's other lovers, right? Especially Julian, that ballet dancer, who breaks her toes because he is he's jealous of her career, that she's become this, like, budding ballet dancer, right?
Yeah.
And is jealous with Kathy's closeness to Christopher, her relationship with Paul, and he forbids them, plus Kathy's affair with her mother's fiance, Bart. Oh, don't worry, if you're listening to us, we're going to come back to Bart. We're going to circle this wagon train. Paul is the best guy. Maybe it's that middle class Catholic in me, Rita, but dude, you're 40. Okay, you're 40. What are you doing succumbing to a teenager? And then, okay, giving his blessing, like, yeah, I'm totally okay with you and Christopher being together. I know everything that happened. I know your relationship is, born out of trauma. But, he's always loved you, Kathy. Go be with him. I give your blessing. Not, Kathy, try to have a normal life, try to move on beyond what happened to you.
Can I make an argument that, and we also know that in the next book, it's just If There Be Thorns, right? It's described that they have a very intense love affair, that their children, Kathy's children, who Chris brings up as his own, witness them being so in love. So there's no doubt that there's real love there, and it's something that transcends anything that we might be able to understand. They went through something we don't get, and I think that Paul understood them and understood that. And God, I kind of feel gross justifying this for the record. I really
just be aware, everyone, that Rita is not pro-incest. I mean, it is true that the way V.C. Andrews writes this, you do end up cheering for Kathy and Christopher, and he is amazing. Christopher is amazing to Kathy. Like, she can seduce their mother's fiance. She can be married to Paul. She can kiss him wildly. And then go marry Julian, like you said, be mean to him, and he will come back. He is such a good father to her kids that in If There Be Thorns, which I admit I don't like as much as Flowers in the Attic or Petals in the Wind, one of the things that really traumatizes Bart is you and mom are brother and sister. They're like shocked.
Yeah. But I mean, going back to Paul, to me too, I think he really loved Kathy. Like, Kathy was his end all be all. Like, Paul loved Kathy almost as much, if not more, than Chris loved Kathy. Probably not quite as much as Chris loved, because Chris was obsessive with his love, and so forgiving with his love. But Paul, to me, I would argue that he gave her his blessing because, number one, he probably knew that secretly she wanted to be with Christopher, and after all this time, she denied herself that. And second of all, he probably knew that, or definitely knew, that no one would take care of Kathy as well as Chris could.
No. And Chris...
He's problematic. V.C. Andrews is problematic, but to be honest with you, I think he is the only decent character.
No, I would argue that Chris is pretty decent. And If There Be Thorns, Kathy just shows up with Cindy, who is the child of one of her dance students, and is like, yeah, Chris, this is our daughter now. You know how I could never give us a child? Voila, here's our child. Here's the daughter I've always wanted.
You desperately want to talk about Cindy, don't you? Talk about Cindy, my dear. Who is Cindy? Tell us all about Cindy.
Well, in If There Be Thorns, the third book in the novel, Kathy and Christopher are now living in another town. They pretend that Chris was Paul's younger brother. And as you mentioned, Kathy and Christopher are very, very passionate with each other. They find intense physical joy with one another. But Kathy, even though she can have children with almost all of her lovers, except for Paul, cannot get pregnant with Christopher, and she is upset because she wants to have incest babies with her brother. And she particularly wants a daughter. This is something that she really wants. She wants a daughter. And
can I just interject and say,
sure.
After everything that has happened, why would she want a daughter?
I don't know. See, that's something I wanted to talk about too. Why?
Why would you want, after what happened with, Corinne and her mother, Corinne and Kathy, obviously these people have the guys all seem to be cool with each other. But the women, not so much. So, I feel for Kathy, but she already has 2 kids. She's had a really traumatic life. I don't think there's anything wrong with maybe wanting another child, but at the same time, if it's not working with Chris, she should probably call it a day. And especially since they constantly talk about God and God's will. Maybe God's saying, if in this universe of the book, if you believe in God, God's saying you shouldn't be having this kid, and especially with the complexity of female relationships, I'm kind of surprised she really felt that urge to have a girl.
Okay, can I offer my theory? And you won't judge me and want to hit me and tell me how horrible I am?
Do I ever judge you?
Yes.
Do I ever judge you?
Yes. For Paul, for not liking Kathy.
For Kathy?
For not liking Kathy, and for the whole miscarriage thing.
I don't judge you for not liking Kathy. Don't be silly. Come on. I disagree with you.
You're just disappointed in me.
I'm not disappointed.
No, but I think a part of it is, remember how in the attic she and Christopher became the parents for Carrie and Corey?
Right.
In Petals in the Wind, Carrie commits suicide.
Right.
And Kathy never really got over it. That is the straw that broke the camel's back for her. That's why she decided she had to go seduce her mother's fiance, Bart, had to shame her mother publicly, had to tear her mother down, have to get revenge on the grandmother. And Corinne, Paul and Christopher are telling her, please don't do this. Kathy, don't you realize that you're only hurting yourself? But she's like, it's for Carrie. It's for Corey. And I feel for her that she thinks she has to have that daughter because she lost Carrie. She lost herself. And if she has a little girl, then that little girl can, have the life that she didn't have, that Carrie was stolen. I don't know, just my 2 cents.
I could go with that, absolutely. She loved Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see that. I just feel like when we talk about these characters not being self-aware, it's like...
But you don't know how to be a good mother to a daughter, Kathy.
Right. I mean, and like, so again, we keep saying there's that common theme about, the past repeating itself and people becoming mirror images of people from the past and whatever. You would think, considering that she's always so wary of everything that happened in the past, and even though, we say she's not self-aware, she's often very conscious of her, how should I put it? I don't want to say her relation to Corinne, because obviously she's related to her, but you know what I mean, how she resembles Corinne in many ways. So I just feel like she should be thinking about being particularly cautious.
Well, okay, you know how Corinne unabashedly showed that Christopher was her favorite, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in If There Be Thorns, even though it's not one of my favorite novels in the series, Kathy doesn't realize how she plays favorite with Jory, her son, the one who shares her love for ballet, and her preference for Cindy, and how she's not spending as much time with Bart, her child, with her mother's fiance.
Right. So tell me, well, they were married at that point, Rainey.
True.
They were married. That wasn't her mother's fiance anymore. That was her mother's husband for many years.
True. Sorry.
Tell me about Cindy. What's Cindy like?
Cindy is whatever the book needs her to be. It's what I love about her and hate about her as well. Cindy is basically just a conflict tool, because Cindy's blonde and Cindy's beautiful, so of course she looks like Kathy and Christopher, right? While Bart is dark-haired, and Cindy's getting all of the attention from her mother, and basically Cindy just disappears from the story after that. She's always with Kathy. She's, telling Jory what a great older brother he is, and not, paying attention to Bart, because Bart is weird and he can't feel pain.
Is there any incest between Cindy and her brothers, or?
Well, actually, it doesn't happen until Seeds of Yesterday, which is the 4th book, right? Mm-hmm. The 4th book in the series. Mm-hmm. And Cindy ends up actually being this, what's a nicer word for slut?
Loose?
Well, how do you say it when you are having sex with your boyfriend in your brother's house and you don't close the door?
I don't know. What?
Well, Bart ends up admitting that he's always had feelings for Cindy.
And so this obviously plays into the animosity they have for each other, especially, particularly on his side, right? Because he's nasty to her all the time. He's nasty to everybody. He's not a very happy child. Which is interesting because I just want to make a point that goes back to Petals in the Wind, where Kathy finally acknowledges, she seeks out Corinne, she hooks up with her husband Bart, Bart Sr., and Bart Sr., who also, by the way, she kissed in his sleep, which led to the whole incest rape with Chris. But she admits at the end, after their relationship, and Bart dies at the end of the book, she finally realizes, like, he's the guy I've always dreamt about being with.
He's my dark prince.
He was the dark-haired man in the shadows when I practiced ballet. He was the person I wanted to be with after all this time. So it's interesting to me that Jory, who is her relationship with Julian, the mean ballet dancer, that she favorites Jory.
She does.
That she favorites Cindy, but that she overlooks Bart, who, by her own admission, is the product of her meant-to-be union with Bart Sr.
Do you think that actually makes sense? I don't think it does. I think the one that she would, I think this is one of the reasons why I couldn't really ever warm up to If There Be Thorns.
Either.
It's because it's just so convenient for Bart to immediately make a connection with the mysterious woman in black next door who just happens to be Corinne, who lived through the fire that killed Bart Sr., and is now married to her butler, John Amos.
Oh, God. Yeah, no, I don't think it's, and I'll tell you something. I really only, if I'm going to reread any of them, I reread Flowers in the Attic and Petals in the Wind, and that's really it. Because I didn't buy that conflict. I didn't buy that she's not, first of all, Kathy really wasn't the type of person that picked favorites. I mean, think about how good, she really, honestly, faults and all, was a good parent to Corey and Carrie in Flowers in the Attic.
Yeah, and she was aware that her mother's treatment hurt her.
Right. And then in Petals in the Wind, when she has the two boys when they're growing up, she makes a point of constantly giving them kisses and being sweet to them. She talks about how she loves them, about how she wants to give them a different childhood, about how, she's
when she moves, she just doesn't take Jory. She takes Carrie too, because she saw Carrie as her child as well.
Right, exactly. So it doesn't really ring true to me that she would have favorites at all, let alone exclude the child that she had with the man that she arguably loved the most.
Third. Christopher, Paul, Bart.
I think that she loved Bart the most.
Really?
Ooh. Yeah.
Wow.
It depends on the type of love, right? She wasn't with Bart long enough and significantly enough to really do the test of time. But when she says in Petals in the Wind, like I said, when she realizes now that he's dead, he's died in the fire, and she finally has that, realization that he was the man she dreamt about for years. That's why she was so drawn to kissing him that night in Flowers in the Attic when he was asleep. That he was exactly the kind of man that he really wanted, that she had always really wanted.
That is true.
Me, I mean, maybe not in, like, reality, like, she probably loved Chris the most, but you understand what I mean? Like, I think that she...
Like, he is the embodiment of my childhood fantasies.
And I think that she feels that he would have been the man that she was destined to be with, had not...
Well, the whole attic thing.
Right, exactly. You know what I mean? I mean, I could be wrong, and I think, you know, I do think that she loves Chris the most. I probably phrased it wrong, but I think that she...
In another life, if she and Chris hadn't had that traumatic experience, if she had been...
the most.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
She was haunted when Julian died. Like, she was haunted when Julian died, and she blamed herself for being emotionally unavailable, and that's what she felt like that kind of pushed him to being more vicious, which I agree with. But I also think, you know, when she talks about Bart, I just think, you know what I'm saying.
She had affection for him. She had deep affection for him. Yeah.
And like what happened with Chris, I mean, there was no resisting that anymore. She loved Chris, but it wasn't something that I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, okay, can we go back to another thing which I think is one of the weakest factors in If There Be Thorns? How the hell are we supposed to believe that Kathy did not do anything to stop Bart when he tries to drown Cindy in the pool, strangles Jory's dog?
Yep.
And and she and Christopher, and this is kind of, not only does it paint Kathy to not be a good mother, really, Christopher, you're a doctor at this point. I mean, I know you're not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but I would think that being a doctor, he would be like, maybe we need to get our little boy some professional help.
I think this points to the unfortunate choice to have a ghostwriter like this after V.C. Andrews died.
Did he start taking over? I thought this was still V.C. Andrews writing this.
No, I don't believe so. I do not believe so, no. She wrote Flowers in the Attic.
Petals.
She wrote most, if not all, of Petals. She wrote part of Seeds of Yesterday. Oh, no.
If There Be Thorns?
The book. No. The prequel.
Oh, Garden of Shadows.
Garden of Shadows. So she had written like a synopsis, or like a general synopsis of what she wanted to happen in the books. Niederman took over. He had all that, but in my opinion, I think that that's what ended up happening. I think that who Kathy and Chris were was taken over and was poorly executed. And to be honest with you, it's like, really, was it really necessary? Like, Petals in the Wind could have been the last book.
I really think so. I mean, the way how Bart finds out that his parents are brother and sister is that Kathy is injured, right? And she can't dance again. And so Kathy decides that she's going to write about her life as a way of processing what's happened to her. And she just happens to leave out this like diary of, oh yes, my brother and I are living as husband and wife, and you know, here are our 3 kids. Your children,
so unbelievable.
Your children are not small. Like, I think Jory is a teenager and Bart is like 10 or 12.
The most curious ages too. I think that was really stupid. I don't think that's something that Kathy would have done. And
the whole you and Christopher are devil spawn, so I'm going to, you know, burn you alive.
Yeah, so let's talk about Bart.
Okay.
So before you talk about Bart, I just wanted to go back and talk about something that I had uncovered in all of my freakish research about V.C. Andrews. So she grew up in the Southern Baptist Church.
Yes.
And it's funny that I found that out. I actually didn't know that about her, and I already knew a lot of freakish details about her, so that's saying something. I had found this interview, and it makes sense when you look back on Flowers in the Attic and the grandmother and all of her freakish fanaticism about religion. So anyway, she talks about how she grew up in the Southern Baptist Church, and she says, this is V.C. Andrews, my grandmother was fanatical about his religion. When we moved to Portsmouth, my mother felt under his control, and he insisted that everybody go to church on Sunday morning and Sunday night and on Wednesday, and she resented it. She didn't want to go, and she didn't go, but she made me go. At first, I liked it. When I was in Rochester, I went to a Methodist church where they didn't seem to have all those fire and brimstone speeches, and I was kind of enthralled by how many women just worshiped the minister. Later, I got a little disgusted. I think the people are hypocrites, that they go to church mainly to show off their new clothes. They turn away from religion and into things like clothes and gossip and malicious rumors.
Well, she's not wrong.
She's not wrong, and I think it's interesting too, right, that she talks about the fire and brimstone speeches, and what I thought was interesting, her grandfather was fanatical about his religion. When we moved to Portsmouth, my mother fell under his control. What does that sound like, Rainey?
It sounds
a daughter?
Well, it also sounds like Bart falling under the control of John Amos.
Right, and doesn't it sound also like Corinne falling under the control of her father?
Of the grandmother falling under control of her husband.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that's really interesting, and especially like her viewpoint on religion.
Well, it makes sense. The grandmother was religiously fanatical. John Amos, who is the butler of the grandmother, who later marries Corinne, and let's stick a pin in that because the John Amos thing is going to come up when we talk about the problems with the ghostwriter. The Corinne falls under the care of John Amos, right? And Bart falls under John Amos, who teaches him about fire and brimstone and God's eternal damnation. And if anything, Bart is a confused little boy, if we can overlook trying to drown his adopted sister and killing his...
He's demonstrating sociopathic behavior. So, I mean, to me, V.C. Andrews probably should have tuned that down a little bit.
Again, we don't know, is this V.C. Andrews or is this Niederman?
True, right. We don't know how much. That's the crazy thing also to me. How much of this did she outline?
I don't know. I mean, I can maybe see that she wants to show how John Amos is encouraging Bart's hatred towards his family. But at the same time, I don't remember anything previously involving, this kind of behavior. I mean, even the grandmother, when she gives the children the arsenic-laced donuts, tells them, you shouldn't eat sweets, they rot your teeth.
You know what's actually kind of sad, minutely sad? She was warning them.
Yes, totally. You are so right about that.
In spite of all of her evilness, and when you read the rest of the series as well, you can kind of understand why, or there's a reason given as to her cruelty, and she's very, very cruel to those children. At the same time, she's a very religious person, and it would be very out of the scope of her belief system to murder somebody. So when you first find out about the donuts and whatever, you're like, oh, the grandmother did it, and then when you realize, no, it's Corinne. And all along, the grandmother was warning them, don't eat your sweets. Don't eat too many sweets. And they didn't get it, obviously, and they were eating them. And it makes her so much more complicated.
Which I think we can see in V.C. Andrews' writing, and we don't see that here in If There Be Thorns. John Amos is just straight up almost a cartoon villain.
Should we discuss So we were talking about conflicts between, what V.C. Andrews had written versus what the ghostwriter, wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And since we're kind of talking about the grandmother, it was a point that you had wanted to bring up about the change in the grandmother from a woman that was always cruel.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody who used to love Corinne until Corinne married Chris Sr. But more importantly, before we actually get to what she was like before, we know about her in Flowers in the Attic. We know she's super nasty. In Petals in the Wind.
Yes.
Like, Kathy finally comes to her and exacts her revenge.
And she's old, and she's frail, and Kathy...
she's mute.
Yeah, Kathy still, beats her up with a riding crop.
Do you feel any remorse for the grandmother?
I did when it came out that it wasn't her who poisoned the children.
Right. What do you make of V.C. Andrews' decision to have Corinne be the one who's actually poisoning them? With what we've been shown about the grandmother and how the grandmother is.
I remember being so shocked when I read that, because I think I accepted that Corinne was, she was selfish, she wasn't a good mother, she was very materialistic, but I didn't think she was capable of murder.
Mm-hmm.
And then that actually made me want to go back and look at Flowers in the Attic, and little things started to pop up, right? The grandmother stopping Corinne from hitting Kathy. The, grandmother telling Corinne, if you don't like my rules, you can leave.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, she was cold. Yes, she was judgmental, but it was Corinne who put her children there in danger.
Right.
And then...
Do you think that Corinne always knew that what was going to have to happen with those children? We talked about it before, because remember I brought up that in Flowers in the Attic, in the beginning, after Chris Sr. has died, Corinne paces back and forth. Occasionally she glances at the children, and Kathy picks up on those glances and thinks there's something weird in them, and, Corinne slips up in the words she uses sometimes. Do you think it was always an intention of hers to do away with them?
I think it was in the back of her mind, but it wasn't until they went to Foxworth, the mansion, that she remembered what she had given up.
Why do you think why do you think the grandmother, being a God-fearing woman, didn't stop her?
That is something that I've always been so maybe not obsessed, but it's one of those mysteries that I have, and it makes it even worse when we do read Garden of Shadows, the prequel, right?
Mm-hmm.
That she changes, everything about the grandmother changes. Throughout the series, up until Garden of Shadows, the grandmother is known as the grandmother. Obviously, that's how Rita and I refer to her this whole time, because that is how she's known. She's called the grandmother. But in Garden of Shadows, we get to know her as Olivia.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very, very telling that I think of her as two completely different people.
Right, and it's so hard, because it's like, do you feel sorry for her? Because when you do read that prequel, you realize that she's been put in this very
horrible marriage.
She's being abused. Her spirit's being broken down.
Mm.
At the same time, it's like 4 innocent, beautiful children has come into your home, And maybe, your husband is the nasty one that is having these conditions, that, Corinne has to win back his favor and whatever. And she warns them about the donuts, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, she's this religious, God-fearing person.
Mm-hmm.
And amazing to me. When you read it again, it makes more sense to have her as this villain. But she becomes very complicated. And then I have to be honest with you, that very descriptive scene in Petals in the Wind,
mm-hmm.
when Kathy comes to finally torture and exact her revenge upon the grandmother. And it, some of it is warranted. She's cruel. She whipped the shit out of Kathy. She whipped the shit out of Chris. She put tar in Kathy's hair. She starved them. She tortured them mentally. At the same time, there's that scene where Kathy's getting her revenge, and I felt sorry for her. It was a very unpleasant scene.
Especially when Bart is telling Kathy, who would beat up this poor, paralyzed mute woman? She couldn't even scream. But I wonder if part of it is to illustrate that Kathy's need for revenge has blinded her to the monster that she has become, that she has surpassed her mother and her grandmother in terms of cruelty.
Right. An eye for an eye, And I think that it really would divide most people who read it. I remember when I was younger, mm-hmm. and this female teenager, which is sort of the book, the book is kind of intending to provoke a response from.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, good, the grandmother got what she wanted. And then upon reading it further, it becomes a lot more complicated.
Oh, it does. It really does. And I know what she was trying to do in Garden of Shadows, let's see, from the point of view. But then the characters become so different. Number one, we find out that John Amos is actually the grandmother's cousin or something.
Yeah, but it's so weird. I can't even, once we get into all those, nitty-gritty things, it's what? Was that really necessary?
But then it means Corinne has married 2 relatives in her lifetime.
Right. The series should have ended,
mm-hmm.
in my opinion. The series should have ended with Petals in the Wind. That's it.
Definitely.
I think all of this extraneous shit about the kids finding out and all of this extra, melodramatic stuff. And that's saying something. If I'm saying that's melodramatic.
Oh, yeah, because Seeds of Yesterday just becomes freaking messed up. Jory becomes paralyzed. Yeah. Bart seduces Jory's wife. And the wife, tells Jory, I married you thinking that you were a man who could walk. The only thing I could say in Seeds of Yesterday is Chris's death. And Chris's death so perfectly matched his father's.
Right. It was heartbreaking. I don't like that Chris died. I actually, and that's the reason why I have never reread it again. And I don't want to, because it really, and then also that heartbreaking scene of Kathy going up into the attic of their home, and she decorates the walls with paper flowers like they did in Flowers in the Attic, and she sits down in her chair and she's ready, she has flashbacks of everything, and she dies that way. It's just very, really sad.
Well, this is another thing that really made it hard for me to like Seeds of Yesterday, is why would they go back? Why go back to your trauma?
I don't know.
Okay, do you think now is the time when we talk about adaptations? Or do you want to talk about, since we were on our trend of when it should have stopped? Because I agree with you 100% with Petals on the Wind being the last. But if we were to allow up to Seeds of Yesterday and even Garden of Shadows and say that, the V.C. Andrews, Flowers in the Attic, series were these, 5 books, right? We can accept that it is these 5 books, right? It has been these 5 books since 1986 when Garden of Shadows published. But you know, that sweet, sweet money, that sweet, sweet Flowers in the Attic money did not stop there. Mm-hmm. And Andrew Niederman actually wrote the stage adaptation for Flowers in the Attic, which premiered in 2014. And I will put a link in the description where you can look on YouTube and see the adaptation. It's, well... So in talking about the stage adaptation, and I don't want to lose that. I just want to also add to that. There was a film version, I believe it was 1985, 1986. Yes. The adaptation, the first adaptation was in 1987, and Kristy Swanson, the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer, played Kathy.
Yes. And so, okay, so I remember watching that movie. So we have that adaptation, and we're going to get to how later on Lifetime adapted it with Heather Graham, and also the girl, I can't think of her name right now, but she was in Mad Men, Sally, the daughter. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, as Rainey has just referenced, that there's a stage adaptation. But I want to go back to that first film adaptation and something which I find really fascinating.
Okay.
So they changed a few things. And one of the things, the biggest thing that they've changed, is the incestuous relationship. Mm-hmm. Now, they allude to weird vibes in one scene
and
Kathy's
staring at each other.
Chris is one. What?
Staring at each other.
Yeah, but you know what? You know, nothing is ever particularly overt, and it's very PG. And I would say, and this is like, I don't know if this speaks to my own weirdness, but at the completion of the movie, there's something missing. And I was thinking to myself, I wasn't thinking to myself then because, you know, I didn't really think about it too much. I just remember feeling kind of dissatisfied. And now when I look back on it, I'm like, am I dissatisfied because they cut out the whole relationship? Am I that creepy? And maybe because that whole relationship is the driving force behind a lot of it. And it's very sanitized and it's just very like, I don't think that they did a particularly good job at showing how horrendous it was.
Well, even when you see the posters for it, they try to make it more of a horror.
Yeah, which was something that would drive V.C. Andrews crazy. She has a cameo in it, which is funny, but that would drive her crazy because she actually really hated being lumped into the whole horror genre thing. So then, you know, many, many, many decades later, well, not many, whatever, you know what I mean.
Well, from 1987 to 2014, that's many.
A long time. Mm-hmm. They did the adaptation for Lifetime, which I did not watch. Rainey watched some of it with Heather Graham, and then now Rainey is bringing up Heather's at stage play. And there is that legitimate question. Mm-hmm. Could there ever really be, and I believe, Rainey, that you posed this question to me, could there ever really be a faithful adaptation of Flowers in the Attic?
Yes.
You do? You think so?
I think there can be, but I don't think that it would get massively distributed.
I actually read something interesting, and this was a long time ago. Mm-hmm. And it was saying that Sofia Coppola, was a fan of the books.
Oh, this is right up her alley.
Right. And that she really wanted to do it. She wanted to film it. She wanted to have her own adaptation of it. And I remember the last that I read of it, you know, she was seriously contemplating it and blah, 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 blah. Uh-huh. It never came to be. The next thing I knew, I was hearing about Heather Graham being in the Lifetime adaptation of it. There was a whole series. I mean, they covered all of the books, which is shocking. Like all of the books.
Except for Garden of Shadows.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So to me, I think that Sofia Coppola would have done an amazing version of it. I really am still holding out on that because I remember reading
Well, actually, for the 80s version, Wes Craven wrote a screenplay for it. And according to rumors, I don't know if this is true, the studios were really horrified because he stayed pretty faithful. His adaptation included the incest.
And I think it should. I'm sorry. I don't know if that makes me a deviant or what, but I think it should because that's sort of the heart. It's not necessarily the heart.
No, but it shows the consequences of what the grandmother and Corinne did to these children.
And dare I say that, the whole thing is the horrendous things that people can do to each other, what your parents can do to you, this horror story that happens to them. But I would say that the incest is a response to it, mm-hmm. and how people deal with or react to these horrible things happening to them. So I think that that would have been really interesting. I wish we could get our hands on that.
Oh yeah, I want to see the Coppola version. I want to read Wes Craven's script for it. But rounding out to this legacy of Flowers in the Attic, it's time, Rita. We need to talk about it. The Christopher Diaries. Are you properly prepared? Do we need to?
So first I have to say, I don't think that there could ever be a faithful adaptation. Mm-hmm. Film adaptation or stage. I just don't think it can happen.
It has to be left to our imagination. Even Sofia Coppola is going to let you down.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't think that you can incorporate all of, it's so dense. It's just so much. I don't know.
Well,
I would love to see it.
What if there's a Game of Thrones style adaptation that they turn it into a mini-series with a cast of thousands?
So, well, as for Christopher's Diaries, this is something that I had never heard of until you.
Oh, wait, always with me. Always with me. Okay. All right. I'm ready. Lay it on me.
It's your fault. You're the obvious deviant between the two of us, but apparently, they are written from the point of view of Christopher, and I guess, you view everything through the lens of
No. You're telling it all wrong. Okay.
So.
I always have to have the ugly side, right? So years later, after Seeds of Yesterday, the entire main branch of the Foxworth family has died off, and these other relatives come and take over. There is a girl there named Kristen, and she's...
Did you read this?
Yes, I did. This is how I am dedicated to our podcast. I just read the first one.
Not to read them.
Because I wanted to spare you. Unlike what you did with Real.
I'm betrayed right now. You told me not to read them. I would have read them for the shit.
Because I read the first one and it was just so bad and I got angry.
Alright, so tell us about it.
So it turns out that while they were stuck in the attic, Christopher wrote his own version or just kept a diary to keep him from going crazy. It totally undoes everything that we learned in Flowers in the Attic, told by Kathy's point of view.
Christopher never would have kept a diary. He never would have kept one.
And it just, you see things from his point of view, right? And it gets really, really weird. Like the series gets weird. I cannot tell you how weird the series gets. Kristen, like, starts spending more and more time in the attic, obsessed with Christopher and Kathy, and Kristen's boyfriend sees her going there, and they start reading Christopher's diaries out loud. They even buy wigs so they can be blonde, and they, like, cosplay being Christopher and Kathy.
All right, I have to tell you something.
Okay.
I wrote this, and this is autobiographical.
Okay.
It's about me.
You mean you were cosplaying Flowers in the Attic without me?
Who do you want to be, Carrie?
I'm the one with the big head and the little body? Okay, but the biggest fuck you in the series, okay, comes in book 3, because God knows you couldn't do this in just one book, not 2, but in 3. And this is called Secret Brother. It turns out, can I get a drum roll? Corey didn't die.
Tell me about this. Fuck that.
Yeah, Corey doesn't die.
You know what did die?
What? The series?
My ability to do a drum roll.
Now, I admit I stopped reading the first book, The Secrets of Foxworth, Christopher's Diaries, with the whole let's wear wigs as cosplay being Chris and Kathy, because that's what all teenagers do, is like, let's reenact teenage incest trauma.
I have a serious question for you.
Why did I do this? I don't know. Why did I do this? I don't know. I drink and I like to hurt myself. That's who I am.
So this ties to, a conversation we had when we were talking about Flowers in the Attic, but, what the hell is it about this book, about this series, about this author, considering all the things that we talked about today and last time, that makes people so obsessed with it and makes people have to respond and have a Christopher point of view, and it wasn't just one book.
No.
And that it bombed and people stopped reading it and nobody wrote it again. It's multiple.
Uh-huh.
So my question to you, and I really, because I don't have an answer to it, so maybe together we can try to come up to some consensus, but what is it about it that makes it so resonant today?
I don't know. I will say that I couldn't get past the first book, but there are people in Goodreads who were saying, like, it was great revisiting the attic, being there, looking at it from Christopher's perspective, because Kathy... Yeah, and Kathy is not a reliable narrator. It's good to know, like, our initial complaints that, Christopher was, like, blindly loyal to Corinne. No, it turns out he had his own doubts, but he felt that, he had to be strong because he was the eldest, which, okay,
But here's my problem.
Yes.
This is not written by V.C. Andrews.
No,
so
it's not.
This is not a reliable view into Christopher psyche. So it's basically glorified fan fiction. So,
but he is the chosen. This is written by Niederman, the chosen ghostwriter.
I don't care. It's not.
Are you still mad that Corey is alive?
Yeah, first of all, that's ridiculous. Second of all, I don't believe that Niederman should be touching it anymore. It's a done series. They paid him to write more series. That's fine.
Other series.
What?
He can write other series. Just don't touch this one anymore. Can I tell you something? And you have to promise not to hit me through the computer screen.
Mm-hmm.
When Kristen and her boyfriend are, like, reading the books to each other at first before they bought the wigs for each other. Mm-hmm. They started calling each other brother and sister.
See, I just have such a problem with it. And I have a problem with it for so many reasons. And it goes back to things that I've said before, but to me, and it also goes back to a question I asked you before, too, when I was talking about B.C. Andrews. Is this just something that happened in the story, or is this a fetish? Because this is something that she obviously loves to talk about.
Niederman has doubled down on the incest. I don't think we can just lay everything on V.C. Andrews' feet anymore. I mean, Niederman is the one who made Corinne marry not just her uncle, you know, Chris Sr., but also now her mother's cousin. Now, I realize that Corinne didn't know that the grandmother wasn't her biological mother, but she knew that John Amos was her mother's cousin. So in her mind, she has committed incest twice, and she's totally okay with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, but the problem is, okay, so B.C. Andrews wrote about incest in this particular situation, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
She understood the characters, she knew the characters. He comes in, he decides, because for a lucrative point of view, right? Like, he's going to make money with this. And it bothers me because it's something he should just leave alone. He's getting all this money to write these series based on, you know, blurbs that V.C. Andrews might have left behind or not. He's following a formula that V.C. Andrews left behind when it comes to incest and whatever. But it's troublesome to me because, first of all, it never makes sense that Corey lived. And I think that if V.C. Andrews was alive and heard that he made Corey out to be alive, she would probably, she'd flip the fuck out. Because that goes against...
Does it help if I tell you that Corey suffered from amnesia?
No, come on, stop. It's getting more and more ridiculous. It upsets me that way. I think that it's honestly a disservice to the series.
Well, can I tell you his defense over this? And you have to remember, this is his words, not mine, so please do not choke me through the computer. Mm-hmm. Okay? So, the justification for why he thinks this makes sense. Now, I have to bring you back to our favorite sequel to Flowers in the Attic, Petals on the Wind.
Yeah, the best one.
The best one. I mean, I should have stopped there.
In ways, it's better than Flowers in the Attic.
I think they're equal to each other, but this is the thing, right? So I do not double want to choke him because, number one, Corey's alive and he uses our favorite sequel to justify this. Or you could see it as a double fuck you. So I don't know. But when Corinne is confronted by Kathy during the party, right? And screams at her, "This is what you've done to us. It's your fault that Corey died." Right? You're with me with that? We remember it?
Mm.
Okay, well, Corinne says that I was never going to let it happen. I had a plan. The reason why I gave you guys arsenic was to make you sick so that you can escape the attic.
Right.
I was going to secret you all away.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, he said that that's actually what happened with Corey, but then Corinne got scared and didn't know what to do, so she abandoned Corey at a hospital, and Corey was so sick, he got amnesia, and...
So, I can't see you anymore. Can you see me?
No.
I am violently shaking my head. To be honest with you, it's not even worth discussing. Like, this whole book, it's ridiculous. And people who read it are like me and you, who are, nostalgic about it and we're curious, but it's glorified fan fiction. Like, I might as well go to fanfiction.net
We might as well now read My Immortal, the horrible Harry Potter fan fiction that had like Dumbledore become a crack addict and like Hermione becoming like a Death Eater and
Well, so I have a question for you.
Yes.
So, Rainey, you have read the series, you've read the shitty series about Christopher's books.
One, do not hang that on me. I did not read all of Christopher Diaries, okay?
Fine. And you're like me in that regard, that you're interested by all of this and we want to discuss it and whatever, and you've read it multiple times. Why is it still... And then let me just tell you something. So somebody who probably, who follows me from, stories that I've written, emailed me.
Uh-huh.
And he went bananas on it.
Okay.
He thought it was awful. He was like, I don't know how this could be a good book. Is it Flowers in the Attic sucks? And bringing up good points. It's terrible.
Flowers in the Attic sucks? You suck! Sorry. I'm okay now.
To you is, what is the draw?
Well, I think we discussed this last time, but number one, V.C. Andrews.
Yeah. We discussed it, but then you went and read Christopher's
Diaries.
Oh, and wait, and I went psycho. I mean, got all of these quotes from V.C. Andrews and all these articles, more than I even said. So what is it about it that makes us want to defend it? Because I was defending it. I sent an entire email back defending it.
Well, okay, I have such affection for this book. I mean, I know most people are going to judge me and going to say like, it's a pulp novel, it's an incest romance and everything, but one thing that I really, really like about it is despite everything, Chris and Kathy were really in love with each other.
Mm-hmm.
They were these two horrible, traumatized children, and yet Kathy never gave up on her dream of dance, and she pursued it until an injury stopped her. Christopher became the doctor that he wanted to be. They fought the odds and ended up with each other, and they were deeply in love with one another.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I want them to have their happy ending.
I agree with you. And I have to admit that there's something very that makes you, it's not even so much identifying with them or, pitying them or anything like that. V.C. Andrews did a very good job, in my opinion, of creating characters who face this insane scenario and find their way out of it using their wits and using whatever resources they can. They never fucking give up. I have to tell you, if somebody locked me up in an attic, I feel like in 5 minutes, I'd be like, I'm done. I'm dead. This is it. I'm done. This is it. I'm gone. Bye. But they never give up.
No, they don't. They really don't. And there's something.
And also, this might also be disgusting to say as well, but whatever. They love each other.
Yeah, they do.
And it's love, and I don't think that it's because they're brother and sister. They just because of whatever, they happen to fall in love with each other. And it's a kind of love that's understanding, that's not judgmental, unconditional. Like you were bringing up before, Christy, oh my God, like I'm thinking of Christy Swanson. Kathy, so many things in her attempt to do what was right and distance herself from Chris. And she was mean sometimes, and she was selfish sometimes, and she made a lot of stupid decisions. And no matter what, Chris was always there for her. And I think that that's the kind of love that we want to read about in books.
Oh, I will put this out there. Christopher and Kathy's love story is a much better love story than Christian Grey and Anastasia Steele, and much better than Edward and Bella. And their brother and sister.
Hell yes.
And part of it is also, I just love how totally bonkers V.C. Andrews' universe is. Like, we have mute servants, we have John Amos, who, I'm like, why are you obsessed with them, dude? You know, we have psychopathic Bart.
I feel like you're a little obsessed with John Amos.
I just want to know, I have to avenge the grandmother, you know, or Malcolm Foxworth and his obsession with his own mother, Corinne, and the swan bed.
I just kind of like thought of John Amos as this dysfunctional henchman. That's how I always see him.
Okay. This is how fucked up I am. This is how fucked I am. I went and reread the series for this podcast, and like, John Amos was planning on getting Bart to kill everyone. Corinne, Kathy, Christopher, you know, telling Bart that you are a vessel of the vengeful spirit of Malcolm Foxworth. I'm sorry. How can you write that with a straight face?
It's ridiculous. So, the big question now is, what shall we discuss next time? What should we do?
Do you want to do something fun? Something that we like?
Should we do something fun? Should we do something super literary? Or should we do something shitty? Ooh. I mean, we'll take suggestions, of course. Should we analyze Jane Eyre next time?
I would love to analyze Jane Eyre. And if you want to give us a suggestion, if you think Jane Eyre is something that we should pick, please leave us a message on the Underbelly podcast at SoundCloud, or at our YouTube channel, the Underbelly podcast on YouTube. You can also give us an email at podcastunderbelly@gmail.com. Both Rita and I
on Twitter.
Yes, Rita and I are very active on Twitter. I'm at Rainey Scribbles, and Rita is at Girl in the Moon 7. We love getting feedback, even if it's to tell us that we have horrible taste in books.
Yes.
And yes, we're aware of it. We are aware we have terrible taste in books.
That's part of our, part of our allure.
It's part of our shtick, man.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And who knows, stick around. You might also discover we also have horrible taste in movies. One of these days, we're going to have to talk about our favorite Harlequin romance movies adaptations.
Yes. All of those good things. We really do want feedback, because we want to talk about things like, I understand, if there were people who didn't read Flowers in the Attic or don't know V.C. Andrews and maybe heard the synopsis and was kind of like, that's not something that I'm interested in, but wants us to talk about something else that you're interested in, we would love that. Also, if there's something that you want us to hate read, like if you read a really shitty book.
Oh, yes, please.
Live for that. Or if you've read something that's really good recently, and you think it's something that's worthy of talking about, we would love to do that too.
If you like what we're doing over here and you think it's something worthwhile, please give us a like, give us a subscription. We totally are online a lot, and we will answer anything that you ask us, as long as it's not weird. I mean, if you ask me what colors my underwear, I'm not going to respond to that.
I'll let you know. No, I'm just kidding.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, guys. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your July.
Have a great rest of your July. Rita and I are going to be going back to the underbelly that is the education system sooner or later.
Listen, I'm already there. I'm already there, Rainey.
You're always ahead of me. Okay, thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you guys. Bye.